Now, welcome back to Africa 54. Just a short time ago in the United States, Congress celebrated the life, legacy, and values of Nelson Mandela in the U.S. Capitol, Rotunda. The festive ceremony included a colorful entry dance, a song, and speeches from prominent members of the Senate, Congress, and even Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool of South Africa to the United States. Now, all speakers spoke very glowingly about Nelson Mandela. We're joined for more from the Capitol Rotunda by our anchor at large, Ndimyake Mwakalyelye. And Ndimi, welcome.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I think you described the mood there very well. It was such a jubilant, such a tribute to Mr. Mandela, who unfortunately is keeping the world anxious as he lies in a Pretoria hospital. Yes, today's celebration called Celebrating the Life, Legacy and Value of Mr. Nelson Mandela, of course, going back many years to the days when before he was arrested, after he was arrested, and right up until he was released. And I think this was the first time that both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, came together for such a tribute. And as you noted, there were a lot of very dignified, very high-level officials, including Maxine Waters, who of course is the House of Representatives, very, very influential in putting pressure on the South African government to have before he was president, of course, Nelson Mandela released from prison, including pushing for sanctions against him. And she shared a few words with the audience today.
Celebrate the 95th birthday of the first president of a democratic South Africa, Nelson Mandela. But more than that, we celebrate the life, the legacy, and the values of a true long freedom fighter. Happy birthday, Madiba.
And there were a lot of happy birthdays to Mr. Mandela today from all corners of the society, and a lot of people who came to the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center, ranging from just regular members of the public to, as I mentioned earlier, members of both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And among them was a group called the Free South Africa Movement, which was very influential too in pushing and securing and putting pressure on the South African government for Mr. Mandela's release. And I have with me Cecelie Counts of the Free South Africa Movement, which actually was and very influential. Maybe you could, well, thanks for joining me, Ms. Counts.
Thank you.
Well, if you could take us back, 1990, literally the year Mr. Mandela was released from prison,
Yes.
He came here to the United States. A lot of it to do with your organization and what you did.
Yes, well, we represented the people around the country who had mobilized to push elected officials to change the policy toward South Africa, to pull money out of companies doing business with apartheid. Mm-hmm. Many American companies were making the system function, whether it was IBM in the past cards or other electronic companies, auto companies, mm-hmm. Coca-Cola. And so Maxine Waters, for example, was a member of the California legislature at the time. And when California pulled its money out of companies doing business with South Africa, that was a tremendous step forward. And so when President Mandela was finally released from prison in 1990, he came to this country, and we as a movement organized events for him around the country so that people could actually see this man and hear him speak and learn from him, and so that he could extend his thanks for the solidarity we had expressed over the decades.
What are your thoughts on today's tribute to Mr. Mandela? I mean, when you have long-standing members of both the Senate and the House really paying tribute to Mr. Mandela and the efforts that you put into to make everything happen.
Today's tribute was truly historic. Emancipation Hall is the newest part of the Capitol. It's a place that honors people in this country who fought for freedom. In terms of African American history, it's a place where people like Sojourner Truth and Rosa Parks and Frederick Douglass have been recognized. And to have an event like that today, complete with African drummers, an African American choir, a jazz band playing Mwakalyelye's Bring Home Nelson Mandela, was quite historic, quite a fitting tribute. And to see Republican and Democratic members of the House and the Senate come together to read the words of Nelson Mandela was something most of us will have a hard time believing it until we look at the program again.
Now, Ms. Maxine Waters made reference to Mr. Mandela being one of the most significant world leaders in the 100 years.
Oh, yes.
And of course, many people agree with that. What are your thoughts on how far that movement has come since his release, and of course, him also continuing to push for freedom in South Africa?
Well, as people mentioned today, this government considered Nelson Mandela a terrorist for many years. Special permission had to be granted for even people like Oliver Tambo to come and speak on behalf of the liberation struggle of South Africa. And so the fact that he was invited to speak before both houses of the Congress in 1990, before he became president, showed how effective the pressure of people had been on their elected members. It had completely turned around their views of who was on the right side of history. And the honors that were bestowed on him, the meetings with the president, the Medal of Freedom, these are the highest honors that come from the United States government. And again, they were in recognition of his stature and his place among world leaders.
You personally got to meet him on both the occasions when he came to the United States.
Yes, I did. It was,
Tell us a little bit about what you got, what was your sense of him?
It was quite moving, of course, to meet him. Most of us thought when we began this effort that we'd never see him walk out of jail. We were proud and surprised at how strong and nimble he was. He came out of prison at 72. So he was not a young man. He'd spent the best part of his life in prison. But we were all impressed by his sense of humor, his quiet affection, his dignity, and his willingness to engage in listening to our struggles. As you well know, we have our own problems in this country. We still have a long history to deal with of racial oppression and intimidation. We have a long way to go. And so we really got the sense from him that solidarity was reciprocal, that he appreciated our solidarity with their struggle, and we appreciated their solidarity with ours. Again, you heard the South African ambassador today reference that. Yes.
Now, very briefly, before we let you go, what is Free South Africa movement doing today? Is it still relevant in any way?
Well, first of all, as we all know, the problems of South Africa are not solved, and indeed, the problems facing people of African descent around the world, no matter where they live, have not been solved. So whether it's the problems of people of African descent in Haiti and Colombia, South America, or whether it's the problems of people in Mali or Somalia or Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe has been a terrible disappointment for us. We fought so hard.
The elections are scheduled within the month, so I'm sure you're
we are hoping for the best. We are hoping for the best. Yes. And so we understand that our success is inextricably linked to one another's success.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cecelie Counts.
Thank you.
Of the Free South Africa movement, joining us today at the Rotunda in the Russell Building here in Washington, D.C.